Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony Cyber-shot RX10 on the left and the Sony Alpha A7 on the right. Now, most people are going to look at this comparison already and say, how is this even occurring? Well, it is, and that's because, quite frankly, the RX10 is an incredible photographic tool, as is the A7 and A7R, and inherently, because of the I'll say it's not a substantial price premium between at least picking up the A7 versus the RX10, because the RX10 retails for $1,300 and the A7 is $1,700 body alone. Of course, what you're getting is inherently completely different. Inside this camera, you have a 1-inch sensor. You've got a fixed lens on here that's 8.3 times in terms of reach. Whereas with the A7, you're getting a full-frame 24-megapixel sensor, far more manual controls, a higher quality OLED electronic viewfinder, better ergonomics, and the ability to attach a wide variety of E-mount lenses, which will perform in a cropped mode, like the power zoom you're looking at here, the 18-200 SELP, as well as native FE lenses, which are quite limited right now, but with the launch of the Zeiss Zoom this month, I think that the A7 and A7R are going to look a lot better. Not that they didn't already represent some of the best cameras on the market, but finally some extra glass to match, because options are very limited right now. In fact, you could make the argument that the A7 and A7R are dream cameras for photographers that just have tremendous collections of lenses and are ready to throw them onto the A7 and A7R. But for the average consumer, the A7 and A7R could be looked at as a bit of a nightmare, considering the kit lens right now is the only one to actually have optical steady shot over here, and that runs $500 on its own. $2,000 for the actual kit with the A7. So if we wanted to do an exact comparison with the kit lens, it would be $2,000 versus the $1,300. So again, a substantial difference there, no question about it. But I am thinking in terms, again, of the body alone at $1,700. And when you look at what you're going to be able to get in a still image capacity, of course, the full-frame sensor here is going to trounce the 1-inch sensor, especially when pixel peeping. I mean, there simply is nowhere near as much information. Even though this is a 20-megapixel sensor, it's on a 1-inch form. The surface area of a full frame is giving you a true 35-millimeter film experience, so clearly this is for someone who is looking for a zero-compromise experience. In fact, it's the culmination of the NEX, or Sony's now Alpha, mirrorless interchangeable lens camera business based around their E-mount, which did begin with cameras like the NEX5N in terms of widespread success and developed into the 5R, 5T, the 6, the 7, and now the A6000. But the 7 is the no-compromise version. This is the version that a pro can pick up, because, you know, NEX cameras were not really acceptable for pros in terms of enough programmable buttons, paired with, quite frankly, the image quality that they needed for their studio work. Even though some photographers may work with APS-C digital SLRs, many prefer, obviously, the ones associated with true print, the ability to go full frame, also for depth of field, among other things. The RX10 can't come close when it comes to shallow depth of field. It has some ability, and that's because Sony's done a great job with pairing it with a phenomenal piece of Carl Zeiss T-Star glass that is f2.8 across the entire span of its 24 to 200 millimeter range. And that's an equivalency to the 35 millimeter. Now, it's not a true equivalency, obviously, that's what Sony's quoting, but again, it is an 8.3 times zoom lens. So not a tremendous amount of reach here, but there are really arguably a lot of features that both of these cameras share, such as weatherproofing, audio in and out for monitoring, things that Sony reserves for the semi-pro and enthusiast and pro tier category only. And that's, again, why I have them side by side. In fact, some, I think, would probably wish that this readout was somewhere on the A7 or A7R, but there's no room for that, really. And the A7, A7R are focused on really just delivering as much customization as you could get. With the RX10, you do have a dedicated aperture dial here, which is great. You can turn off the click function so that it's silent for video. I mean, this is a very versatile all-in-one bridge camera that really tries to do everything. Of course, the A7 and A7R don't try to do everything. They can do everything. You just need to invest in the glass. So it really comes down to, at least for me in this comparison, because I own both and keeping both, whether or not you are ready to go down that road of buying a lot of expensive glass for something like the A7, A7R, or even, of course, an NEX camera, which are now the Alphas, which I already compared the RX10 to the NEX6. And if you are willing to go down that road, if you are interested in buying multiple lenses and have the appropriate funding to do so, then by all means the A7 and A7R are the not only superior choice, but the only choice right now, in my opinion, because there's nothing else like this camera on the market. You can't find a full-frame imaging device. Granted, it doesn't have 4K video. It does have clean HDMI output, as does the RX10, another thing they share in common. But lately, all of Sony's high-end cameras are doing that. But important things to note, again, the customization. This has a neutral density filter built in, which is pretty cool. But that's, again, a consumer-driven feature. That's not something that any pro is going to actually want. They're just going to, have their filters with them. 62 millimeter thread on here is going to allow you to use filters, but don't plan on doing any kind of extending with this or attachments. That's definitely a mileage may vary situation, because this is a power zoom, and there's no question that putting flex on the barrel could probably end up damaging it. But in terms of video, this camera actually, I would say, outperforms the A7 and the A7R, at least with what present native E-mount glass exists. And that's to do with that we've got direct pixel readout here, where when shooting video, there's no downsampling of the actual sensor. We're getting exactly what the sensor is capturing in a clean output, and as a result, you can see there are far less artifacts. It's just a cleaner video image, smoother looking on panning than anything you're going to get out of the A7 or A7R. In the same vein, the A7 and A7R, as I mentioned, are going to absolutely destroy this camera on stills, but you're not going to be able to find a lens with this versatility for the A7 or A7R, again, natively. So that is something in the RX10's favor. Something I've noticed through the course of reviewing and now using and owning both of these is that the actual doors that give you access to your audio input, output, as well as your micro HDMI out and micro USB are more substantial on the RX10, which is a little bit baffling because this is the RX consumer oriented camera, point and shoot bridge camera, whereas the A7 is, aimed at bringing pros over to Sony's mirrorless brand. Even the memory card bay here, you can see that give right now. I'll get a little bit closer. I don't think you'll hear the click. There's actually play in that. And the plastic doors that give access to all of the A7's ports just aren't as substantial. Very thin plastic. And these are probably my biggest complaints about this camera, but they're very small ones. It's just odd to me that somehow the RX10 inherited superior build quality when it comes to those elements. As I just showed you on one side here, more solid, they're uniform, to match the finish of the camera, but they're actually just a thicker, more substantial build. And then the same applies to the actual memory card slot there. It's just more substantial. It does not have that flex. It doesn't creak, it doesn't pop, and I've checked other cameras. That's standard fare for the A7. It's not a lemon that I have here. Keep in mind, you've got a top-tier, best-in-class OLED viewfinder here on the A7. Even though this is an OLED viewfinder on the left, with the RX10, it is nowhere near the quality of the one in the A7. And that's, again, part of what you're paying for. This is still very serviceable, and I do like the fact that both are center mounted, something you won't find with the A6000. That means it's friendly to both lefty and righties. Both have Sony's multi-interface shoe, and both have very similar menu layouts in terms of menu diving. You're going to have almost an identical experience. The only difference, of course, is going to be there's a lot more to dive through with the A7 than there is with the RX10, and that's because it is a full-frame, arguably pro camera when compared to something like the bridge-style RX10. Both have their exposure compensation dials in the exact same location, which is something Sony is hot on doing right now. The power switches are even similar, even though it's located, behind the shutter release as opposed to in front of on the A7. It's a switch rather than a button, something that is interesting considering buttons are usually what you find on Cyber-shots. The C1 almost in the same spot. The mode dial nowhere near the same positioning, but check it out, pretty much identical, which is noteworthy. I'm going to bring you up close so you can see that. You'll have to remember all of the modes there, but they're identical. And that speaks to the target audience for both of these cameras. I think they know that the customer that's interested in the A7 is probably going to be interested in the RX10 as well. So for all these people baffled by, who the RX10 fits in terms of a customer, I think that, someone who owns the A7 and reserves it for when they need the best quality, and so that kind of stays at home, but when they travel light and they want one camera that does it all, well, the RX10 is that solution. And I have the 18-200 mounted on here because really that's the best zoom option that I can stick on the A7 natively right now to compare to the lens that's built in here. And when you talk about the difference, the crop factor between 1-inch sensor and full frame, the aperture, that great f2.8 constant here with the RX10, ends up being about the same in terms of speed and ability to collect light as the far slower power zoom on the right, when again you take into account the fact that we got a full frame sensor under the hood. So all of these things are relevant. On the back side of the cameras, things are substantially different. Take a picture, a mental image there. Even the proximity sensor, by the way, on the viewfinder is on the top of the A7. It's not right mounted, which is another noteworthy thing. The grip style is also completely different. This is definitely more of a one-size-fits-all, the RX10. The A7 is one of those grips that even many pros out there are still trying to get accustomed to. I actually think it's great, but it's a matter of personal preference like anything else. But as you can see, the back of this camera, very, very different. A lot more plastic in the build, even though this is a weighty camera. They both have the same range of motion on their articulating screens, and they both have basically the same exact layout on the screen too. NEX cameras went with a wider format than either of these stick to. The movie button, I actually prefer the placement over here on the RX10 as opposed to the side-mounted approach that all of Sony's interchangeable-lens mirrorless models employ. But otherwise, some customizable buttons here. They're not leaving you out. They realize you're spending $1,300 on a camera. So really, this comparison isn't because these cameras are comparable in terms of what they do. It's more of that they can really complement one another, but for the person who's trying to decide, do I need interchangeable lens? I'm spending over $1,000. I like what Sony has to offer, and you should, because they're offering things that aren't matched. Yeah, this is right now the king of bridge cameras, and the A7, well, there's nothing to compare it to other than the higher resolution A7R. So really it's a matter of, as I mentioned earlier in this video, do you want to go down the road of investing in glass? The images that come out of the RX10 are great. 8 out of 10 I feel like are keepers. That's not the success rate the average person is going to have with any interchangeable lens camera, let alone a full frame one. So that's something I think everyone needs to know that doesn't already know that. A lot more care needs to be taken when shooting with a full frame camera, especially since most of the lenses, as I mentioned right now, don't have stabilization. The RX10 has both active steady shot as well as traditional stabilization. So clearly these are for different consumers, even though they have so much in common in terms of flexibility for a pro to take on something like the RX10, especially for videography. I mean, this is easily a solid solution for videographers, whereas the A7 and A7R are a little bit of a struggle, I would say, but offer more flexibility in that any lens can be mounted to them. And that's something that, again, depending on your needs and your style of work, is going to affect your decision-making process. Bottom line is both of these cameras are fantastic. The A7 needs more time unless you have legacy glass you're ready to go with. The RX10 is just ready out of the box. It all depends what your end goal is. If it's I feel like most consumers buy into these systems because they think it's going to equate to better photography. The reality is, for that consumer, the RX10 is really going to give you better images, more keepers, and also be more capable in the hands of someone else that maybe doesn't want to grow with the camera, a friend, whoever it may be that you hand it off to use, and it's going to strictly stay in auto mode. You're going to get better results out of the RX10 than you will out of any interchangeable lens camera. It's just a matter of fact. That's a rule of thumb. So that's why I'm comparing these. They're close in price, $1,300, $1,700 for the body, and I feel like it's got to cross just about every user's mind, even though you would think it wouldn't. So here we go again with one of my crazy comparisons, but in my opinion, a valid one because of the price point. And also where Sony's going with the APS-C mirrorless business. Now the A6000, it's an $800 kit. Quite frankly, the RX10, in my opinion, is clearly a higher-end camera from Sony's perspective in terms of pricing. In terms of flexibility and performance, that's a whole nother topic I can't get into because I don't have an A6000, but technically the sensor and autofocus should also make it kill the RX10. But the RX10 is all about that lens and sensor pairing that the A7 doesn't have that advantage either. No interchangeable lens camera does. In the same way that the RX10 has an impediment of not being able to remove it. But boy, if you were going to be stuck with a piece of glass, it's kind of like the RX1 and the RX100. Basically, every RX camera, Sony has made sure you've got a lens that you can keep for life. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.